Thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Hendo. I will be the room moderator. This session will be Accelerate Digital Citizen Innovation with Hybrid Cloud on AWS. I'd like everyone to welcome to the stage Mr. Craig Fulton, VP and Senior Partner APAC, Lead Hybrid Cloud.
Thank you. Hi, welcome everyone to IBM session. Hopefully you find something interesting here. Otherwise, we're all going to get fired. So the topic of this was about driving inclusivity and engagement when delivering improved and increased digital services to citizens and communities is one of the key objectives of government. Yet the complexity of that digitization, the change through cloud migration and modernization, comes at a material cost. And some of those key things are security concerns, complex legacy that's hard to unpick, core systems carrying a lot of technical debt, and complex data environments that people struggle to simplify and move. New ways of working, enterprise operating models, and the implementation of the cloud strategies that everyone has that they fail to implement are all things that we found our clients are coming to us and saying, we're sort of stuck. So 72% of enterprise cloud adoption requires the use of advanced capabilities to fully realize the transformation that is required to move your businesses forward. And yet, 69% of executives that we surveyed, out of 7,200 executives around the world, only 69% of them attributed most of the change to operating models, not to the technology itself. So if you don't operate the technology well, then you're not going to be successful. As we see cloud mature, there are key areas that are still a focus. Privacy and security is one, where cyber threats are at an all-time high, so they're not going away. People are still asking what workloads to move to cloud, when, and what to do with them once they're there. So we thought that had gone. It's still there, and it's just getting more complex. How do you make data work for you? So we've all heard about data. Data is fantastic, all of the things you can do with it. But actually, how many people are using it effectively and are getting the insights that they expect out of it? And how many people have moved it to cloud and are using all the capabilities available to them? Also, most people have a strategy. As I said, a lot of people are struggling to actually implement that strategy. But from a tactical point of view, what are you doing tactically to keep moving to ensure that you're taking one step at a time in line with where you want to be strategically? And then from an operating model point of view, have you determined the operating model you need for your future operation of cloud or hybrid cloud, depending on what you've chosen? As we know, a lot of people started with lift and shift. They've realized it cost them a lot of money. They realized it didn't really meet their industry or specific requirements, and they realized to operate it was costing them a lot more money. Now, there is no reason for that other than you need to put in the hard work and work out what it is you really need and what you want to go in the future, and then how to implement it. Dead easy. It is if you've got SMEs like these. So if we could each introduce yourself, tell us where you're from and what your expertise is,
Sure.
We'll get this conversation started.
My name's Amanda Green, and I'm a partner in public sector based here in Canberra, looking after a number of clients across the federal government. Most of my clients are looking at cloud, but my biggest client is the ATO, where we've actually worked very collaboratively with AWS to take it from design through to a well-architected framework of one of the mission-critical applications for the Australian government.
Kieran?
Hi, my name is Kieran Hagan. I'm part of the IBM Technology Division. So that's an area of business that looks after our data, AI, and automation technologies. So I'm effectively a data evangelist from the IBM software business.
And I'm Kathy Robbins. I lead our IBM security services in Australia, Southeast Asia, New Zealand and Korea. I'm a buddy to Kieran in IBM Technology, and we secure the cloud with people like Amanda and Craig.
Fantastic, thank you. And from an evangelist to I feel like I'm at the pulpit. We'll start with the first question. So I said cyber threats are at an all-time high, particularly with the complexity of hybrid multi-cloud. Yet a survey of 7,200 executives, same survey, 1/3 did not have improving cybersecurity and reducing risk as a top initiative. What are the security must-haves for cloud, Catherine?
So I'll address that in a couple of ways. So when we're talking about reducing risk, and this is something that we're finding across the board, whether you're on a hybrid cloud journey or you're multi-cloud or you're quite invested and you've sort of all in from a cloud adoption, or whether you're on-premise, that the attack surface and what we're seeing from a threat landscape is ever increasing, and the cyber risk isn't necessarily reducing, it's just changing. So we're finding that from an executive level, they're expecting when you invest money from a cybersecurity perspective to see a reduction in risk. What you're seeing is a change in the risk. So I'm just going to throw that out there first. But then from a cloud perspective, what you must have is the ability to firstly architect and understand what you're trying to achieve by moving to the cloud. We have historically seen a lot of lift and shift to the cloud where people have architected cloud infrastructure like they would architect it on-premise. Don't do that. It's not a 3-tiered architecture. Just because you had a firewall and a few other things, you don't make a full replica of that on AWS. So make sure that you've got the right people, the right strategy, and the right skill set in your architecture team, so that, or a partner like IBM, that can get you to the cloud and get the best out of the cloud. Then the other side to that is the sort of operational aspects as well. The key management, all the security things that you should have that you did have when you were on-premise needs to also exist on the cloud, and you need to be able to roll that through so that you've got incident management, security incident event management feeds that you're integrating into your security operations, or you've got a managed security services partner that will run that for you. And then the resilience piece. So when you're looking at building clouds, it's also important to look at, because everybody goes, it's on the cloud, it's going to auto back itself up. Actually, it won't. You have to build that resiliency in. And then I've sort of gone straight into architecture and working it through it from that perspective, but then that sort of also has an impact for governance, risk and compliance. If you have the need for a sovereign capability, then the way that you architect your cloud platforms will be, multiple availability zones and, the Australian regions. But if you don't have that, know that, you could potentially have multiple availability zones and region failover to another region. So it's that keeping that, making sure that you've got cyber resilience and obviously cloud resilience as well. And then the sort of the last bit that sort of comes through to all of that from a sovereign perspective and that sort of resilience perspective is knowing that if you do fail over to another region, that in an incident response sort of scenario, you might have to report the data breach according to the region laws. So as an example, if I fail over to Singapore and I am data breached on a Singapore instance, I would have to follow what Singapore's guidelines are as well as Australia's guidelines. And that's one of the gotchas for people when we're looking at security and security infrastructure on cloud.
Thank you, Catherine. That resonates with me. I've had a couple of these. Early in the cloud time, I got caught by a couple of those. I actually put cloud forward as a differentiator for security and worked hard with the security team to make it a differentiator. If you do it well, if you do it badly, then it becomes a bigger mess than you had already on-prem because the attack surface is much bigger. The second thing I learned was I'd set up my whole disaster recovery situation all on cloud, and every SaaS provider was on cloud. And what I realized is when I actually had an event, all of the tools I was going to use to manage my disaster recovery were all on cloud as well. And a lot of them were using sort of chat apps and things. We're a startup using chat apps that disappeared when we had the outage. So just to let you know, think about that when you're using the applications, how you're going to approach it, that they're still going to be available and they're in multiple regions and they've got good architecture as well. So it's not just you, it's dependencies on others. Does anyone else want to comment, or should I move on to the next question?
Oh, no, I was just going to reiterate that Kathy's point about designing from the beginning, I think is really important. And I think as we see increasingly DevSecOps being the important piece that we're looking at, you've got to build in that thinking about it right from the beginning.
Yeah, and moving security completely to the front. Totally agree. So, Amanda, a question for you. Public cloud adoption is evolving more into industry clouds. Obviously, we're here at a public sector conference. What are you seeing in the public sector to show, is that happening in public sector? Are we getting more specific around verticals within public sector? Or you're not seeing that happening?
So I think it's mixed, and I maybe would reframe it in a different way. So I think we have moved past the religious debate on whether cloud is a possible thing in public sector. Obviously, you have to take into account the really critical issues in terms of data privacy and also sovereignty as well. But I think that we're seeing most of the cloud providers have got solutions for that now. So it's less about cloud is not a possibility in public sector, and I think we also saw this morning in the keynote that Dr. Zoran was talking about New South Wales cloud strategy. I think we're seeing all of the states start to understand that they need to think about what that is going forward, and we see it across the Commonwealth as well. I think there is less of a focus on it needing to be an industry-specific cloud and more about where is the opportunity for replicable patterns.
Yep.
So if I look at the work that we've done with the ATO, it's really about saying what's the pattern of the work that we've done and where is the opportunity to replicate that, either within the agency itself or to provide it as a pattern that's applicable across other agencies that may be doing the same kinds of services as well. And I think that's a more useful template for the public sector to look at how they actually do that. And for my own team as well, one of the things that we have the benefit of doing is reaching out to all of the other IBM consultants working globally across public sector to understand the patterns they're using in government and where we can use those to our clients' advantage as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's a really good point because up until the conversation we had earlier, I was struggling to look at industry specifics, and I know there are some healthcare and education, but I was thinking more of sort of federal, and I think it is more, and even from an industry, we're past government cloud, there's a government cloud, it's secure, all of those things. It's more, what are you building on top of that, and can you learn from around the globe around what other federal departments or agencies are doing elsewhere? So I think the reuse, the learnings, the compliance, all of those things are where I think we need to take those learnings, and that's how we're going to fast track that industry equivalent for public sector. Okay, so based on that, one of the things that we all talk about, and I'm not sure everyone understands that well, is data. So, Karen, what are the primary drivers for big data and analytics in the hybrid cloud, and what's the importance of a data fabric to contribute to that? And what kind of benefits can I expect if I do it well?
Yeah, no, thank you, Craig. Actually, that question helps highlight, if you like, some of the challenge in the journey. Because you mentioned there about the concept of big data. And the reality is when we work in information management, data delivery evolves over time. So originally, a lot of agencies and departments invested in the data warehouse. The data warehouse was like the system of record, the golden record for a number of those agencies. And then we had the advent of big data. So that was around 2010, where we started to expand the envelope. So increase the different variety and the volume of content to help drive analytics. Where we're at now is another advent, which we call a data fabric. And the point of a data fabric is to take all those previous investments and really accelerate that into a modern information delivery outcome. So we consider this a modernisation challenge. It's to break down some of those silos that you mentioned about. So a lot of the incumbent information assets are still really high value, but they're disparate. And the challenge for a modern knowledge worker is to access that correct, timely information, but in the context of a new technology. And we see that as a prime opportunity to take new technology, new architectures, and feed that in a totally different way. So in a very simple concept in terms of what does that new technology adoption give you, it's the basis of new innovation.
Okay.
It's that new service delivery, that new customer service citizenship, that previous information chains may have been too rigid to add over time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Again, and it sounds like I made a lot of mistakes, but I think I think I did the same thing. Is big data for the company I work for. When everyone started talking about big data, we just put all our data in the same place. We had no concept, and then we created a whole load of links to it. But we had no concept of what we were going to use the data for. We just thought it was a good idea to put it in one place. The reality is the business didn't use it because they didn't really understand it. And we kept it up to date, and we put it on cloud, and we had a whole load of data all in one place, and it was fantastic, and all we needed to do was work out what we were going to use it for, because there was no business benefit until we got the business involved and tried to work that out, and then we had to re-architect the whole thing, and in that process, they kept using what they had on-premise. So I think it's very key that the outcomes that you're looking for, and in combination with what's the data, how's the data flow, what kind of data, how does that data fabric bring it all together, I think is pretty key to start at the outset before you start running to move all your data around. Because as you know, it gets quite expensive if you get it wrong. It gets quite expensive even if you get it right. Okay, so just to follow on from that, everyone talks about data, and a bit to my own expense here. Everyone talks about data as the new oil. And we're looking at insights that are going to change our business. We're looking at insights that are going to give us new opportunities. We're looking to recover the money that we spent. What does that look like in reality? Because I don't see a lot of people, except in specific industries, coming back and say, that was great. The analytics we got from our data changed our whole way of thinking, changed our world, changed our citizens' life. How does it really manifest? What's the reality?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for very much the courses you talked about, there was a concept, and sometimes data science teams still do this, give me everything. And somehow if you get everything, magic would appear. But what you've got is basically a truckload of everything. Just reading the internet doesn't necessarily give you all the answers, because there's no context to it. There's no actual veracity. There's no meaning or a semantic input as to what is high value content and what is not. It's just a huge influx of information. So the challenge that I had with some of the phrases like data is the new oil, and this was brought up by a colleague of mine, I think it resonates very much. Well, firstly, oil isn't renewable. And the challenge with oil is it needs to be heavily refined and processed.
It's not growing either.
No, and there was a concept that if you go out and build all these extended nets or oil refineries and refine and process this, some good would come of it. And my colleagues actually said, no, I think data is more like water. The beauty of water is that it can be transformed, packaged, and commoditized so it's consumable. And the reality is, water is actually now more expensive than oil when we think about it. So the ability of these new information architectures, because of the volume and the complexity we talked about, you can't manually process that anymore. And through taking the advantage of things like these modernisation approaches, you can start to introduce automation and AI to introduce the things you should be paying attention to and the things that might have a trust index. And what we're doing now is pivoting from passive information stores into helping enable departments to be data service enabled. So the information is actually coming to the practitioner in the context they need it. That's really how you drive effective decision making. So it's a different approach to considering information as an asset and ultimately making it as consumable as water on the shelf.
I like that. Renewable asset, distilled properly, and wanted by everyone. Cool. So this question's for everyone. So again, back to our survey. Our survey said 31% of executives said they've stalled on their cloud journey. Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many people have stalled? They've started. I think we got a 20% And then it went to 22%, and I don't think we've moved much further past that. So why do you think they've stalled?
Well, I'll have a go to start. First of all, I think it has been an exciting frontier. So those first movers, I think, have approached that with a great deal of verve. But to some extent, the low-hanging fruit has been dealt with. Maybe it was a lift and shift. Maybe it was an application that was so broken they were going to have to redo it, built on the cloud, etc. But I think now we're at the hard bit where you have to unpick legacy, where you have to entangle business logic that's been built into applications, and it's not just a simple activity because there's so many dependencies that sit there as well. I think associated with that, one of the things that we've heard a lot about is digital skills, and I think that AWS does a terrific job of making available all sorts of certifications and really getting those technical skills in, but I still think we've got considerable immaturity in cloud strategy skills at the executive or in the boardroom.
Yeah, I would agree. The interesting thing for me in the survey, because we started writing this before that survey came out, was staffing wasn't one of the top areas. And everyone we speak to say they don't have enough of the right skilled people, yet that wasn't one of the top areas for not getting to cloud. In fact, some of our large clients have got more certified people than AWS do, and they're still struggling. So I don't think it was people, because they got the people. I don't think it was education, because they've had the education. For me, part of it was there's a lot of legacy, technical debt, old systems, core systems there, that you kind of need the old skills to work out how to unpick and take to the new skills. Just having the new skills doesn't work anymore. You can build new things, but you need to understand how your existing works and all the technical debt and all the glue that holds it together before you can move it to cloud. So that's one of the big things for me that I'm seeing more and more of. As people get past the new, they get the really, really hard stuff, the core business stuff that they have to unpick. And without taking it from a business lens, they don't really know where to start.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because we talked about, if you like, the early cloud adoption was often IT-driven projects for the most part, and they were migrations. Because what would happen is if you had something like, let's say, a cloud-native software investment, it's very easy to move that from an on-premise to a cloud instance because there was a path to that. So operationally, it made sense. The challenge with a lot of organisations I work with is they will banner these projects as cloud-first initiatives and set very ambitious timeframes. Well, the challenge in that is cloud-first is actually a journey. It's not the business outcome. If you approach it from that business context that you talked about, people, process, and the technology are needed to fully realise that. Yep. So I think the migration capability is quite well established and simple in terms of that delivery. But that next wave, or that maturity curve we talk about, is approaching it with the business outcome in mind. So being more collaborative with your knowledge workers and showing them the return of that investment, rather than simply treating it as, say, a cost recovery exercise.
Yeah, there's an interesting point there. So IBM Think of Cloud, there's 4 different clouds at the moment. We're all moving there, but not everyone's moving to the same one. Stage 1 is that lift and shift, and it moves all the way to stage 4, which is business transformation. It comes from the business through. The cloud is required to enable your business to be new and innovative and move quickly and bring out all those new things, including to citizens, to change the way you do tax, to change the way you do single touch payroll, to change the way you run those kind of things. Without that cloud technology, it's not going to be as easy, but you need to know why.
Some of the security implications as well. For a little while there, the regulators for some of the industries weren't enabling you to do cloud. So you could not put systems of record for financial services on cloud for a while. So your journey to the cloud was sort of tinkering with applications, but you couldn't put customer data or any sort of real banking data for a significant amount of time. And if you looked at the energy sector, they were incentivised for a CapEx spend, not an OpEx spend. So for many, many years, they were investing on-premise. So we've had, a couple of things where you had organisations and some industry verticals that wanted to tinker on the cloud, but they weren't able to fully embrace it. And then the other side to that, from a cost optimisation perspective, which is a lot of what we hear with the journey to the cloud, is that people forget you've still got it's not a very quick journey to the cloud, that sometimes you've still got the old on-prem that you're paying for and the cloud infrastructure that you're paying for. So that's what stalls people in that I thought this was going to be much cheaper. I thought I was going to get a brand new car. I didn't realise I still had the old car in the garage. I don't know what to do with it. And so that sort of journey has sort of stalled it. And then we've seen organisations that have invested in one cloud technology stalled when they got it too hard for all the things that we've spoken about today, and then gone, you know what, I'll try it on a different cloud, and then go and do exactly the same thing again and again, and then they've got a footprint on AWS, Azure and GCP. So we definitely see a lot of that. And then I think ultimately, from a security standpoint as well, cybersecurity is sort of, in some circles, seen as, don't put it on the cloud, it's less secure. It comes down to how you deploy it, where, the cloud actually enables you to accelerate some of the security adoption and be faster at patching, be faster at some of the adoption and testing of services, and moving some of the old legacy things that you might have in the organisation that can't be patched to the cloud. But we're definitely seeing that, depending on the appetite at an executive level and their understanding of the cloud and seeing it as a business enabler, is an impact to how it's adopted, and that's why we see it stall.
Cool. Yeah, it's an age-old IT. Blame the tools, move on, buy a new tool, and everything will be fine. But it all takes hard work. So on that point, a lot of the conversations I still see, particularly with CIOs, are, I want to get to cloud because it's a cost out. How do we change that? Because we realize it's not a cost out. In order to be cost out, it needs to be a business benefit. And it's business agility, and it's the change of doing business, and it's how you can do business and move quicker. So how do we change that? Like, what do we do differently to allow that to change? Amanda?
I totally agree with you that anybody is approaching it purely from a cost-saving point of view is on a hiding to nothing, because that's not going to be, it's not enough of a driver even to galvanise an organisation behind you. So I think that if you're going to try and sell the benefits of cloud, agility is going to be the number one thing that is a useful benefit for an organisation. But I think in order to do that as well, you've got to be really clear on the strategic outcome that you're trying to service and how important that is. So if I look at the case of the ATO, we knew that the profile of the transactions that were coming through were really changing. They were moving away from an annualised reporting to single touch payroll, which was going to see different kinds of volumes, and the ability to build out cloud native capability to deal with that kind of lightweight transactions that were coming at huge volumes was the much more important positioning for why they put the investment behind that. To say, and of course the cost savings are a ancillary benefit that come from that, but the most important decision was how do we quickly deal with a different shape of transaction that is coming through to us as well. And I think, one of the benefits of the pandemic as well has been shown the need to be agile and responsive and, get new policies out there or new payments out there as well, all of which cloud has benefited. So I think that that's been a great testimonial to doing that. But it has to be the business outcome from a point of view of how will this better service citizens that must come first.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, the whole point of taking a journey like this is either to improve knowledge workers within the department so they can make better decision making, or to self-service the citizen in their new demand, what they could do. And it's interesting, I think the McKinsey study said that, in lockdown in 2020, we had about 4 years of digital transformation project investment in that year alone. And we started to see acceleration of this. I mean, the amount of federal apps on my phone almost went from 0 to truckloads. And that sort of innovation is important, because that's really the enabler beyond just an IT spend. The operational cost can be an excellent entry point to this dialogue, but again, it's the end outcome that to me is the true innovation that really matters. And if we get that correct, then it is ultimately a better quality of citizen service. And I think that is the reality in taking this forward as the next step when we discuss with organisations.
Cool.
And from a security standpoint, I feel like I'm always going, and from a security standpoint, it does give you the agility and the security. So where you might have had some problems in your organisation and you're looking for a path out, not only is cloud a cybersecurity enabler, so it allows you to test new products, test new services with very low risk and being able, most things are available in the marketplace, but it also can help you do security at scale. So that integration into the development lifecycle, you've got DevSecOps, you're starting to enable the business in cloud and sort of underpin and stitch in security in a much quicker and easier way than oftentimes that you find on an on-premise deployment.
So we talked about moving away from cost and more to the business. But we know that people aren't doing those large transformations coming from the business down. So what would your advice be to CIOs? Because we just had a bit of a pop at CIOs saying coming bottom up and taking cost out is a short-term gain, but long-term pain. How do we turn that around to say it might be a little bit longer to get the gain, but it shouldn't be? Because like an example is we're working with defense in Singapore. Now, you wouldn't expect, but we're building squads who are doing innovation squads, and they want to learn. They want to fail fast in defense. And about every 10 projects we spin up quickly, they work out from a business perspective whether it's going to be of value or not, and they probably move about 2 forward, and then we scale them to production. And that's Army, Navy, Air Force. So it's not your typical where do you do innovation. So these defense organization. So how do we get that kind of thinking where I'm blown away by how forward-thinking they are. How do we get that sort of innovation to say it's because you're in government department, you've got that tag, which is not true, but how do you get that innovation? How do you get the enthusiasm from the top down? We had a good conversation yesterday in ATO around exactly that. They get a lot of requirements from business who try and solve the problem. They actually just need to think differently about what they're trying to do. Like, why do you need to send a report every quarter? Why can't you just create real-time reporting? And then it's not a big deal. So what do you think? What should we do? What should we innovate on for public sector in Australia?
I think that there's anybody who's worked alongside public servants in any of the departments across town recognises how under the pump those people are, and how there is generally a relentless delivery train of expectations of people just churning things out. So we have to cut them some slack of their ability to lift their heads above the parapet sometimes to be able to deliver on innovation. And oftentimes the funding model that they're working with mitigates against them coming up with anything new or any different ways of doing things, because they may be funded just to deliver on this feature or this sprint, etc. And I think if you think about some of our reactions to some of the apps that came out in COVID that weren't that great, we've been slammed a lot of those, maybe rightly, but again, we have to be more open to the fact that there was a willingness to try and get things out to the public quickly. And maybe some of them weren't great, but let's hope we learned something from that experience that then can get fed out into the next iteration of those things. But I think that as you see increasingly many of the departments moving to agile ways of working, embracing DevSecOps in their ways of working as well, that gives the opportunity to try and hive some of that off for the replication of patterns, as we talked about earlier, or the highlighting of innovation ideas, even if those departments aren't willing to maybe have a line item that relates to, we're going to carve this out for innovation as well. But I think that a lot of that needs to come. You can't just tag somebody and say, you're now the innovation person. No. You've got to build that in at the bottom and give people that opportunity to fail and, the space and time in order to do that. It's not easy.
I was very encouraged by the conversation we had around, a lot of it was around culture and continuous improvement and not creating the special innovation people. Everyone has to innovate and everyone knows their business better than anyone else. So you can't rely on someone else to do your innovation. We just need people to enable it. So that was really good for me. I was happy to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, from that, and I've actually seen this across industries, but it's actually prominent now in the government sector as well, which traditionally we wouldn't have thought of. This idea of innovation, right? The style of engagement has changed now. And in IBM in particular, we've invested very heavily in our garage and co-creation teams. And the point of that is to do something like, I'll refer to a customer in the US as Sonoma County. Now, Sonoma County had an emergency event that required emergency housing after a catastrophic bushfire, and they needed to be in shelters. And they created, just through a 2-day design thinking workshop, a prototype to deliver a seamless service experience to enable those end consumers. So the style has changed from big transformation projects to short, sharp squads and iterations that deliver mini milestones, and they're experiential. And you get the knowledge stake workers alongside technology and your cloud provider to do those prototypes and roll out in iterations. Yep. That's a great way to approach a modernisation journey, right? Yep. And deliver those outcomes in phased approaches that can also deliver long-term funding as that overall ROI.
Yep. No, good point. Catherine, from a security point of view, what did you think?
It enables security at scale, and we use the same methodologies for Garage, for DevSecOps. We often find that some of the adoption of cloud, or even in the development or in an agile program, that it's cultural, where the tooling is disparate, the teams don't want to talk to each other, and we found that building security architecture patterns and helping them build a methodology for DevSecOps across an organisation has enabled them to do security at pace, to move to the cloud at a faster pace, and to have security embedded in everything that they do. So security by design.
Cool. So one thing I wanted to talk about was FinOps, because it's become the new buzzword and everyone has a FinOps practice. But actually, as we've reviewed a lot of the FinOps practices, a bit like the 4 stages of cloud, there's 4 stages of FinOps as well. Because a lot of people have put someone in who's an analyst who just looks at cloudability, for instance, and says, you're spending too much money, or we put a budget. But is that really what FinOps is?
This is music to my ears, Craig. I think I would like to get rid of the term FinOps and
take the ops out.
Yeah, well, I think you really want to focus on value generation. And I get that many organisations haven't necessarily done a great job of actually measuring what they're spending on cloud, but the tools all exist there within the clouds anyway. And the question then is, if that's backwards looking, what decision are you going to make on the basis of it? Because you have to be then looking at culturally, how then is that aligned to my strategic outcomes? What did I want to do that I've now been able to do? And I think, as we talked yesterday as well with our client, that what we are lacking is the visibility of what we've actually achieved. So showing what tech debt has been reduced as a consequence of what we've done in cloud.
What's the benefit you've driven for the money you've spent?
Yeah, of the money we've spent. And at the moment, FinOps is often, perhaps unfairly, but it tends to focus just on the input costs. Yeah. And, I didn't mean to have this much there. I get there's a challenge for government as well, because typically there's been a great focus on CapEx expenditure. Yeah. and thinking about that as solid and dependable and known, and the shift into operating expenditure is a journey of understanding that, but you've got to have that alongside what you're measuring to make sure that it's what are you trying to achieve? It's not just about how many dollars did I spend this month.
So you don't think government's going to move to the Netflix model where no one's got a budget, they just spend for whatever they need to do?
If I saw the amount of rubbish things that get served up to me on Netflix, I really hope not.
Okay.
Risk quantification, I'm going to jump in over you,
on.
Kieran. So with that value lead that Amanda, I agree that that's exactly what we're seeing more of, what is the business outcome? And it's no different in cybersecurity. So we're finding more and more that the FinOps equivalent is risk quantification. So it's not just about, for too long we've sat there with a heat map and we think that's the risk, like this is the inherent risk, this is the treatment, this is the residual risk. It's now that what is the financial impact if that risk materialises? How do we quantify that? And that's very much the FinOps equivalent in risk land.
Even the FinOps equivalent, it's insurance, the
Yeah.
security. Did the insurance policy, was it worthwhile even though you didn't have to use it?
Yes. So we're definitely seeing it, and the risk quantification, that it's not just for the CRO. We're finding that from a cybersecurity perspective, we are talking to people about quantifying what they've done with their threat intelligence feeds, and whether the spend is actually meaning anything for them, or whether they should pivot that to something else. And same with their cloud security and their cloud adoption, whether that was the right investment and pivoting it to something else. So we're definitely seeing a shift where, and it's sort of all interwoven, the sort of cloud, the data, the AI, what we're doing with ML and security, to really use the data to drive forward really tangible data points to make really good business decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a key theme, the operating model, understanding what it is you're trying to achieve and making sure you're heading towards that. Because at the moment, as you're saying, you could have all the tools, but it doesn't mean you've got an effectively security service.
Yes.
You might have the right people with the right certifications. It still doesn't mean you've got an effective service. And I think that goes across everything. Kieran, what about from a data perspective? Because that's probably one of the biggest costs, and actually where people are spending a lot of their money at the moment.
Yeah. In fact, it's quite interesting because the term FinOps, right, and then you talked about SecOps, and there's DevOps.
Yeah.
There are new operational terms. To me, this is symptomatic of how people are applying these procedurally to different outcomes. In this case, could be financial return, could be security. To give you a flavour of how dynamic this has become, there is a concept of ML ops, or machine learning operations, for AI-assisted workflows. There is a concept called data ops.
Can you automate the ML ops?
Yes, you can. And you can make it a trust index as well. But these are how we're now thinking end-to-end about certain data or delivery points. So data ops, for example, is like development ops, but for data.
Yep.
The whole point of that is how do you deliver an end-to-end value chain? That's it. Same with FinOps, same with security operations. These are now engagement models that there's a benefit from cloud technologies, that ability to fast prototype, and in this case, take a modernisation approach, microservices now, that you could introduce into a delivery chain.
Yep,
so you can start to add risk and regulation. You can start to add security and governance as part of that delivery chain. At the end of that is actually a financial return. And that overall total cost analysis, that ROI, is actually a benefit of the chain being worked in combination towards that business outcome. That's the new economics.
Thank you, Kieran. Okay, so we're almost finished. Can each of you give me 3 fast things that you would tell people that's what they should concentrate on from the security point of view? From just 3 things that you say, like where you are today, what you see in public sector. Here are the 3 things that I think you should concentrate on. What are the priorities?
Skill your people. Not just for us as a provider, but for you as agencies. Skill your people so they actually understand the context within which they're operating. Skill your executives so they know what they're making decisions about.
Yep, I like that one.
And understand where that is, and focus on the client outcome that you're looking for, rather than the inputs into that.
I'll give you 3 words. Best of breed. The reason why I say that is IBM here at an AWS Summit, we benefit through co-leverage, right? So the ability, if you're using AWS as your cloud provider, the ability to leverage IBM software as part of that investment gives you freedom of choice. It gives you the ability to collaborate. So my recommendation with something like a modernisation or a cloud journey approach is use the best of the things you can bring into that delivery chain. So to me, best of breed is the whole benefit of the partnership in these new technologies.
Yep. Choice is good.
Mine are security at scale. So do it at scale. Security is an enabler.
Yep.
Often it's seen as the handbrake to happiness. Way too often. And I had the third and now I've just gone out of my head. Security in everything you do. That it just has to be everybody's job. It's a team sport. So
Yep.
it's something, it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be, everything just should be done securely.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll close and thank you all for attending. I hope you learned something, got some insights. If you'd like to discuss anything further, because obviously 45 minutes can't go into a lot of detail, you can meet us at the booth. We'll all be at the booth, and there'll be a lot of other IBM experts and everything you can think of at the booth too. But I'm sure we can answer your questions and find the right person for you. And we're keen to speak to you and work out what your problems are. And we pride ourselves on being a company that fixes the complex problems, not the easy ones. So please join us at the booth. Let's have a conversation. Let's work out how we can help and how we can solve your problems. And thank you very much. And that's all from us. And I'd like to thank...
Thank you.
Thank you.